Everybody wants to know about where Diontae Johnson or what he should be paid. We're going to talk about where he ranks and how that relates to what he should be paid by the Pittsburgh Steelers right here in the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm Chris Carter. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things in the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find this show on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and YouTube. As always, you can find this show on, when you find the show on YouTube, please hit the like button if you enjoy it. Hit the subscribe button to our YouTube channel to get all of our daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content and any breaking news updates and all things of the sort. You can also read my work at SteelersNow.com, where you can also read the work of our today's guest, Alan Saunders, writer at Pittsburgh Sports Now. And everything he does. Alan, what's up, man?
What's going on?
Doing great. Glad to have you back on the show. Alan, I want to touch on something that everybody has talked about and will continue to talk about for pretty much the entire season, and that's Diontae Johnson and what he should be paid. We're going to get to what he should be paid in the second segment, but I think it's a little fun having a comparison game and putting him up against other NFL wide receivers, because when everyone's talking about, oh, I would never pay him, or I would definitely pay him, it's important to put it in context of where are his peers. And, peers don't just mean age in this situation. It means guys who are, of his caliber that are getting paid, guys who have been offered contracts that are getting paid right now, moving forward. And that, because ultimately that's what determines the market. It's not just Diontae Johnson. It's all the receivers around him. And you've made this point a lot, is that Diontae Johnson, yes, he hasn't been Antonio Brown. He hasn't been a superstar. He hasn't even really been a star, but he's been productive, and that is worth something in today's NFL.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you can make a good argument about whether it should be worth what it is, and I think you can make a good argument about whether it would be smart for the Steelers to pay the market value. But I don't think you can argue the market. It is what it is. Right. I think what we're seeing from the wide receiver market is a little bit crazy, but it's impossible to look at the guys that have gotten 8-figure salaries, mid-age, $10, $20 million, and think Deontay Johnson just doesn't belong with those. Like, that's crazy. He does belong with those guys. He will get paid like those guys. The question is, will the Steelers give him that kind of contract, and should they? And I think that's a little bit harder to answer, but, I mean, if Hunter Renfrow is worth it, he's worth it. There's a dozen of those examples of guys that are really well paid that you just kind of scratch your head and go, man, I think I'd rather have Diontae Johnson.
Right, and I think that's where I wanted to start with this show. And I got this idea from looking at a recent ranking. I think it was another Pro Football Focus ranking, where they said that Jamar Chase and T. Higgins would both be the number one receiver on every other AFC North team. I can see Jamar Chase got a phenomenal rookie season.
Make kind of an argument it'd be the best wide receiver in the league. Could almost. I mean, I'm not 100%, but I'd listen.
He's put himself in that conversation.
Yeah.
T. Higgins, though, while very impressive and a very good number 2 wide receiver, I'm not so certain about that. And I guess let's start with there as a floor. If you're an NFL owner right now and you had a choice between either receiver, T. Higgins or Diontae Johnson, who are you picking and why?
Well, the one thing that I do like about T. Higgins is that he's really young. He was like a Juju aged rookie. So he's I think he's still only 22, will be maybe 23. He just turned 23 this offseason. So I like that about him. He's also has size speed combination that you just can't teach people. But, I think the question about T. Higgins that I don't have the answer to really is what does he look like without good wide receivers around him and bad quarterback play? Because that's what we're comparing it to when we compare him to Diontae Johnson, right? I mean, right. I don't know the answer to that question. And I do know what Deontay Johnson looks like without other top quality receivers around him and bad quarterback play. The numbers are pretty comparable. I think I would like to have Diontae Johnson a little more than I would like to have T. Higgins. So
I think that's a fair thing to say there. And looking at them, like you said, T. Higgins, he's had Joe Burrow in both his seasons so far in the NFL. Now, granted, one was half of Joe Burrow because he was hurt in part of that season. But when you look at what these guys have done so far, you look at their games. T. Higgins right now in the past 2 seasons is 1 yard shy of 2,000 yards. Deontay Johnson's in 3 seasons has only about 760-ish yards more than him. Has 8 more touchdowns per game. Per game, T. Higgins does have more yards per game than Deontay Johnson. About 8-ish more yards per game when you look at those numbers. But like you said, he's also benefited from a young quarterback who's kind of like, getting excited. And while Deontay Johnson has seen the twilight of Ben Roethlisberger, as well as Devlin Hodges and Mason Rudolph and everything the Steelers have gone through with the quarterback room lately, while also, Deontay Johnson, when he was added to the Pittsburgh Steelers, he was kind of the guy who was supposed to replace Antonio Brown. Juju Smith-Schuster has been injured, was injured a bunch. Chase Claypool, had some up moments, but also had some down moments. T. Higgins last year got to play next to Jamar Chase, and that did attract attention away from him. So I think that's a good thing to say. But let's look at other contemporaries or around the league, guys who are maybe not necessarily the same age, but guys that you might hear more comparisons to. But we will go with someone that was drafted in the same class of Diontae Johnson. That's AJ Brown. He got traded to the Eagles. He got paid a big contract to be there. I think he's a prime example of young receivers getting paid, and that 2019 class is fighting to get paid. A lot of those guys haven't been paid yet. Terry McLaurin, other guys as well. But where do you see him versus an AJ Brown type of receiver? Diontae Johnson, that is.
I think AJ Brown I think he just has a rarer skill set. I think there are fewer guys that are like that true kind of deep ball home run guy.
Mm-hmm.
You look at him, like 15 yards per reception last year. That's worth paying a lot for. Now, did Deontay Johnson have a quarterback that was capable of throwing an average of 15 yards per reception? I don't think so. He certainly wasn't in an offense where that ever happened.
Right.
But I think AJ Brown is a guy that can kind of make that very difficult thing look easy. I feel like Deontay Johnson is more like a high-level possession receiver. He doesn't have great hands, but he just gets so wide open in any situation that but I do feel like there are more of those kind of players. I feel like that the AJ Brown type, where it's just like 5-step drop and here we go, and he can come down with it a lot of the time. That's a pretty rare skill, and there aren't many of those guys. I think I would take AJ Brown over Diontae Johnson, but the numbers aren't like a slam dunk. It's not like they're that far apart either.
No, they're not. In fact, when you look at their per game basis, right, over time, AJ Brown 69.7 yards per game, Deontay Johnson 58.8. AJ Brown, has 0.6 touchdowns per game he's played. Deontay Johnson 0.4. And again, AJ Brown, sure, you could say, well, Ryan Tannehill was no, Aaron Rodgers or situation, but still, you take that over where Ben was. Especially last year, the second half of 2020, and Devlin Hodges and Mason Rudolph in 2019, which to me, that's the biggest thing about Diontae Johnson. Again, when people talk about Diontae Johnson, they think about, the drops and this, and he's not perfect, and this, that, and the third. Diontae Johnson still finished with the 6th most receptions and the 10th most receiving yards last year in the NFL. And that says something. When you look at a guy that does all of that, also he had the 10th most first downs by any wide receiver. You do all that in an offense where the defense was not scared of your quarterback being able to throw the deep ball. They were not scared. They weren't really scared of any particular other wide receiver that the Steelers had. So they were able to kind of focus on you on the shorter routes to make sure that you couldn't break loose and make big plays from it, because that's what the Steelers were banking and living off of. To me, that speaks loudly, when you're comparing him to other veteran wide receivers out there and guys that are in his class. I think again, when you look at what he's been able to produce with Ben Roethlisberger, I'm very intrigued to see what he produces with a Mitch Trubisky, a Kenny Pickett, whoever wins the quarterback battle.
Yeah, I think you said a lot there. All those numbers you rattled off, where he's like top 10 or top 5, and all those are like the counting stats, right? The traditional stats, and the drops aren't included in that stuff, right? Like if you don't catch it, it doesn't show up as a negative.
Right.
So I kind of went into this project I was doing on Saturday, looking at the value of the receivers. And me personally, I'm like a yards per target. That's what I look at when I want to evaluate a receiver. I want to count those drops as negatives. I want to know how often do they throw the ball and they just it's not a drop, but they still don't catch it. Like there's a lot of plays last year where Chase Claypool didn't get a drop, but he also didn't make a catch. And you like an AJ Brown type, I feel like might have caught more of those. So I look at that, but the market doesn't seem to appreciate that. I had one number. You look at the chart on SteelersNow.com, but the payroll goes down like this, and the yards per target is just straight across. There's no difference. Guys that make $30 million a year have just the same yards per target as guys that make $10 million a year. But the guys that put up those big counting stats, the guys with 1,000, 1,200 yards, the guys with 6, 8, 9 touchdowns, those are the guys that get paid well. That's what the market seems to reward. And Deontay Johnson's right there with those guys. So, I mean, look, I think I would rather have AJ Brown than Deontay Johnson, but it's really hard just looking at their numbers and not looking at the player and say like, well, this one's clearly better. Because I mean, he's not. It's subjective, and AJ Brown's making $25 million a year. So it's not a cut or dry thing, even for a player that I think most people would call a top 5 receiver in the league.
No, I agree. It's not a cut or dry thing, but it's one of those things where I want to bring up these numbers to put things in perspective, because I think when people say a wide receiver, they just think of either their favorite moments or just how they generally perceive those guys. For example, if you went purely off of yards per target, he has 6.9 yards per target. That's 102nd out of receivers. That's not good. That's not good.
Not good.
But also you add context to things like that. He wasn't getting too many opportunities to catch the ball beyond 10 yards beyond the line of scrimmage. And he was lucky if he got 10 yards beyond the line of scrimmage.
And here's just, all I have in front of me is guys that signed this offseason. I'm sure there are others, but you look at that yards to target, Robbie Anderson, 4.7, Allen Robinson, 6.2, DJ Moore, 7.1, Stephon Diggs, 7.5. Everybody would tell you he's one of the best receivers in the league, and I agree, but 7.5 yards per target is not impressive at all. So I don't know, maybe that's just not a stat that the league appreciates that much. I don't know. I'll take Cooper Kupp being over 10. I think that's a good place.
I think it is too. That's actually a pretty solid spot. But I want to bring this conversation back into the fold of what do you get paid. We're going to talk about Deontay's drops in a second here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, and then talk about what he gets paid, as well as keep on rolling with the show here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. But first, before we do all that, we got to talk to you guys about Blue Nile. Whether you're ready to pop the question or you're celebrating a milestone moment, find your jewelry as unique as her with the modern convenience of online shopping at BlueNile.com. Blue Nile has simple online tools that let you choose the diamond shape, size, and clarity, as well as setting style. Blue Nile's bench jewelers will then handcraft her perfect engagement ring. Each ring is one of a kind. Looking for fine jewelry but having trouble choosing? Blue Nile has jewelry experts on hand 24/7. They're available by phone or by chat to help you find a memorable gift at every budget. Make your moment sparkle with jewelry from BlueNile.com. And Locked On Sports listeners will get $50 off purchases of $500 or more. This podcast exclusive includes engagement rings. Be sure to use the promo code Locked On. That's LOCKEDON. Locked On. Plus, every order is insured, ships free, and arrives in discreet packaging that won't give away what's inside. So shop stress free and find your forever piece when you visit BlueNile.com today. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm Chris Carter. He's Alan Saunders. We're both of SteelersNow.com talking about your Pittsburgh Steelers, and specifically right now about Diontae Johnson. Before we get into the pay talk, I want to talk to you about the drop numbers. Now, Diontae Johnson officially from Pro Football Focus had 8 drops on the season. That was 12th most in the league. there are two young receivers, in fact, second-year receivers in the NFL who tied him. Do you know who those would be, Alan Saunders?
I mean, I can look, but I don't.
I'm just saying for the sake of suspense for the audience. But CeeDee Lamb and T. Higgins, one person that we're hearing is supposedly better than Diontae Johnson, and another guy, CeeDee Lamb, who's supposed to be the guy that's going to carry the Cowboys into the promised land as far as the passing game goes. But guys who had more drops than Diontae Johnson, Cooper Kupp had 9, Justin Jefferson, DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, Jalen Waddle, A.J. Brown, Tyreek Hill, Jamar Chase, who had the second most drops in the league with 11, and Deebo Samuel, who led the league with 12. And remember, there were a lot of Steelers fans that were really going for him getting an opportunity to be on the Pittsburgh Steelers. But again, I look at this and I think about this and I'm like, man, this is not as cut and dry. And if you're out there saying, well, they all had more targets than Diontae Johnson. No, they didn't. Diontae Johnson had the 4th most targets of any wide receiver in the NFL, only behind Cooper Kupp, Tyreek Hill, and Devontae Adams, Stephon Diggs, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, DJ Moore, Keenan Allen. All those guys had less targets than him last season. But again, the drops are a problem. Deontay. No one's saying that Deontay's hands are great and he doesn't need to improve them. But when we're talking about the money aspect of this, they aren't. I don't think they're as big of a deterrent as people are trying to make them out to be.
I don't think the drops are even a penny of a deterrent for Deontay Johnson's contract. I think it may be a deterrent for the Steelers being the ones to pay it. But I mean, one of you talked about that, like, oh, well, those guys have more targets, and Deontay Johnson's drop rate was 5th among Steelers receivers last year.
Yeah,
only Juju, who played a quarter of the year,
right,
dropped the ball less often than Diontae Johnson.
Mm-hmm.
All the other wide receivers dropped the ball more. And that's really one of the things where, like, drop rate is subjective. If you go look at PFF, they'll have one number. If you go look at Pro Football Reference,
right,
they'll have another number. But when you're comparing them to guys in the same team, which means the same person was charting those games, the ball is coming from the same quarterback, so you're getting roughly the same quality of passes. And you're going to tell me Diontae Johnson's drops are a problem when he drops 6.7% of his passes, according to Pro Football Focus. Chase Claypool dropped 10. Ray McCloud, who I've never heard anybody say Ray McCloud is a drop problem. Ray dropped 9% of his. So, right. I mean, no. Diontae Johnson's drop. Now, were they a problem in 2020? Yes.
Yes.
Is that something that the Steelers probably have in their back of the mind? It's saying, like, okay, are we really going to give this guy $100 million when he was not that good 2 years ago? Absolutely a real concern. But I don't think it will be a concern if he hits the open market at all around the league. And I really don't think it should be that big of a deal. Let's put it this way. I don't think his 2021 drops are a big deal at all. I think that was perfectly reasonable. 6.7% drop rate. Sign me up for that for most wide receivers. Most of those wide receivers that we talked about that are really good around the league are like 10, 11, 12%. So I don't, it's not an issue. I don't think. And the other thing is Diontae Johnson gets open a lot. He is not a guy that needs, where I think you can have a real conversation about Chase Claypool and say, oh, well, he doesn't catch the ball when it's thrown to him enough, whether it's a drop or not.
Right. His
catch percentage needs to be higher. Diontae Johnson's wide open all the time. So, like, if he drops a couple, it's okay because he has a repeatable skill that is getting wide open, and that's much more difficult than trying to will your way to combat catches all the time. I'd rather have that guy than the opposite. So I don't think it's a big deal at all. I think it's way overblown. I think the only people that are thinking about it are Steelers fans because they're remembering the 2020 season, and I don't think it'll cost him a single penny if he hits free agency.
I also think a part of it is Steelers fans are we're used to Antonio Brown for the longest time. I really think a bunch of this is also spoiled because Steelers fans didn't just have a great wide receiver. They had the guy who had the best 6-year run we've ever seen of a wide receiver statistically in NFL history. That was insane. And I think that, that on top of, you got Hines Ward, you had, say, Antonio Holmes, you had all these big names at wide receiver come through Pittsburgh over the past several years. I think that spoils people. But again, when you're looking at, good wide receivers, even guys who are in top 15, maybe even top 10 if you put Diontae Johnson there. He finished top 10 receiving yards last year. These are things that a lot of these receivers still go through. Again, you look at drop rates, guys that had higher drop rates. If pure drops aren't your thing, you want drop percentages, higher drop percentages. Tyreek Hill, Justin Jefferson, Keenan Allen, Jalen Waddle, T. Higgins, Mike Williams, DJ Moore, CeeDee Lamb, Jamar Chase again, and of course Deebo Samuel, who leads the league in droppers. This again, to me, it's another sign that I think these things are overblown. And again, Alan, when you're looking at the money that's being shelled out for these guys, the average amount of money these guys are making per year on these contracts. I mean, you look at Amari Cooper, he's averaging around $20 million a year, and this doesn't mean he's definitely going to get that because there's guaranteed money and how things will eventually play out. But you look at the money that he's at least down for. Christian Kirk, $18 million a year, for what he's worth. Diontae Johnson is definitely better than a Christian Kirk.
I don't think there's any question.
And and then again, you go up the list,
and you can't write that off as like, right. Oh, that's just the Jaguars doing something dumb. He actually fits right in the rest of the market. Christian Kirk got $18 million a year, and he had 982 receiving yards last year. Brandon Cooks was 1037, making 19.9. He's right there. Like Hunter Renfrow, 1038, 16. Like he's right in that. That's not an outlier sound. Like a lot of people when that signing happened, myself included, was like, that was freaking dumb. And it might have been. But if that's what the market is, that's what every single person that paid for a wide receiver this offseason paid.
It's today's market. And I said this a lot for a lot of positions. I've talked about this with quarterback, edge rushers, safeties, all the different positions out there. What the traditional thinker of football, understand to be a certain position's number, it's gone. That's not there anymore. The salary cap it went up this year. It'll go up even more next year. It'll go up even more the year after that. What we think, receivers, you probably a great receiver should get paid, I don't know, $18 million a year. That's out the window. Even if you think right now they should be making $20 million a year. Tyreek Hill's contract has an average per year basis of $30 million a year. Again, he's not going to make exactly that over time, but the money that's getting offered right now, it's going to be larger than what you think. So when people throw out that number and they say, "Oh, Deontay Johnson's not worth $18 million a year," yes, he is, based off of the other receivers out there right now. But also that $18 million that you're thinking in your head, you're like, whoa, that's like a huge number. That's like a quarterback a few years ago. And yeah, sure, it was, but not anymore. And that's my point here, is that our numbers are completely out of whack here when we're talking about these things. And to be honest, I don't even know what the right proportions will be. That's what we're about to see with the market.
Yeah, and I think Steelers fans also are a little bit insulated from this just because the Steelers don't really play in the free agency world that often. So I don't think, maybe compared to some other franchises, they're super up on what exactly a good any position quarterback gets you. But $18 million doesn't even get you a starting quarterback. And I was Jameis Winston, that's like bottom of the barrel stuff. That's not a good starting quarterback. What's Mahomes making? 50? So yeah, I think that's part of it. I also just think, and here's the part of this whole thing that I think really relates to the Steelers, is that I don't understand why the wide receiver market has taken off the way it has.
Yeah.
I understand why the quarterback market is the way it is, because everybody wants one of those guys, and only about 8 teams have one of them, and there's 32 teams, okay? I didn't take an econ major to figure that one out, okay?
Right.
I don't understand why the wide receiver market has taken off, because there are more good wide receivers coming out of college football every year right now than there ever has been at any point in all of history. And I think that maybe some smart teams are going to sit out of this market and say, this doesn't make sense. That might be what you're going to get paid on the open market, and that might be what's quote unquote fair. But this market is broken, and I'm not going to buy your Bitcoin right now because I think the crap is coming. Okay, I can see that. And I think the Steelers, who have a really good track record of drafting wide receivers, obviously that was under Kevin Colbert, not Omar Khan. But I think they might end up being one of those teams. They have not paid a lot of money for wide receivers in the past. Doesn't seem to be their MO. I could see them just kind of looking at where the market is and saying, thanks, maybe no thanks.
That's where I'm at with too, is because and again, maybe the Steelers do take a chance because they don't have a quarterback that they're paying Ben Roethlisberger money, and maybe they feel like this is where we'll splurge right now because we want to keep that guy. But again, there's no pressure on them to do that now. Wait until you see at the end of this season, if Diontae Johnson comes out with Mitch Trubisky and puts up 2,000 yards and is the best receiver in football, okay, pay the man. Like
I think if that happens, he's just gone.
That's true. Okay,
I think
good.
then
he's going to want his money.
Then he's going to be in that $30 million price range, and that's just I don't see the Steelers doing that. I do think that's the risk the Steelers have to take, is if they don't sign him this offseason and he just takes off, I think he will price himself out of Pittsburgh.
Here's an idea. Can you tag and trade him at that situation?
Well, sure. I honestly think some kind of bridge contract might actually be the best for both sides here.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what Deontay Johnson's going to get on the market. If he decides he wants to wait and see, he's got to bet on himself. There's that saying. You could say, what if he has a really good year with Mitch Trubisky? What if he doesn't get along with Mitch Trubisky? He never gets the football. He has a bad year, and then he doesn't get anywhere near this kind of offer, right? That's also a possibility. And so what if, the Steelers start, 3 different quarterbacks and have just a mess at the quarterback position. They can't figure out who they want to play. They just hand the ball off to Najee 30 times every game and say, forget it. Like that. Those are all possibilities too. And so maybe if he wants a little bit of security, they could do like a 2-year deal or something like that, where he can still hit free agency at some point. He can still get that big money. I think that might actually make a lot of sense for both sides. I think the Steelers would be reluctant to pay that. Spotrac put it out there, and I actually did a lot of research and came up with about the same number, say 4 years, $88 million as that's pretty darn close to me to what the market value is for him. I kind of have a hard time seeing the Steelers pull the trigger on that.
It's same here. I just, again, unless he has some great year and they find a way to keep him, they said, we're keeping you in the fold at least for another year or two. Like, Bud Dupree type of situation. We're like, hey, we're not going to pay you all that, but we will keep you around for as long as we can while we're figuring out who's going to replace you down the line. Who knows? Maybe George Pickens becomes that guy, because that's another thing here. And that relates back to your point that you made a couple minutes ago. The receiver market in the NFL draft is insane. The last 3 years, 2021, or excuse me, 2022 in the NFL draft, 6 receivers go in the first round. We're not even looking at George Pickens and beyond. Just in the first round, 6 wide receivers went. In 2021, 5 receivers went in the first round. In 2020, 6 receivers went in the first round. And then you get a guy like Chase Claypool falling to you in the second. He was like, the 13th or 14th receiver pick or something like that. This is a crazy market where it's like, look, you can get a big guy, a tall guy, a fast guy, a great hands guy, a separation guy in pretty much every class, because it's been that talent rich. And when you're seeing that, there's not as much of a reason to commit that much money to someone that you're like, about. And maybe the Steelers are even like, hey, we like you, Diontae, but we also like George Pickens. If George Pickens has a big year, if Chase Claypool has the kind of year that he thinks he can. He told me he wanted to be he thinks he could be a top 3 receiver in the NFL this year. You look at those type of possibilities. If the Steelers get either one of those guys to perform at a high level, you're like, okay, Diontae, we can't afford to pay you that much because we got these guys. That's where I see this going. I think that's a great point by you. But you also talked about the quarterback position. I want to talk to you more about the quarterback position. We got an interesting question from a listener about the quarterback position. But first, I got to talk to you guys about BetOnline.net. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all your betting stats and sports information. Find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's NBA playoffs and the start of Major League Baseball this season. The NBA Finals are well underway. Game 5 was just last night. The Stanley Cup Finals are here. Lots of things to bet on. Get on all your information at BetOnline.net, which is your continued source for all your sports wagering information, live betting, playoffs, esports, and more. Head to the website today. Use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in the action when you visit BetOnline, where the game starts. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Alan Saunders. We are both of SteelersNow.com And we're going to wrap things up here talking about the quarterback position. As you know, if you ever have a question that you want to get on this show, all you have to do is call 412-223-6644. Again, that's 412-223-6644, and leave your name, where you're from, and a voicemail that asks your question. Keep it under a minute, folks. If you go too long, I can't use you. But and we'll take your question. If you're international, you can't call that number. Just email an MP3 file with your name and where you're from attached to it, and just give it and send it to LOSteelersTopicBag@gmail.com. Again, that's LOSteelersTopicBag@gmail.com. Today's question comes from all the way on the West Coast. We've got Michael of San Diego talking quarterbacks.
Hey, Chris, this is Michael from San Diego. I've got a bit of a hypothetical question for today. What if Mitch Trubisky is the guy? What happens to Kenny Pickett if Mitch Trubisky just absolutely balls out the next season and the season afterwards? We don't need Kenny Pickett. What happens to him? That's my question. Thanks, Chris. Love the show. See ya.
Thank you, Michael. We appreciate everyone who calls in and asks questions. That's a good question because there's a possibility. Now, granted, this isn't a question that we're going to figure out this year because if Mitch Trubisky does ball out this year, who knows if he does it again? Who knows? But, Alan, I think the bottom line to this question is it's something that Mike Tomlin says all the time. That's a good problem to have. If Mitch Trubisky balls out and you got Kenny Pickett on his third year of his rookie deal, and he's sitting there, oh no, what are we going to do? You're going to keep playing with the guy who's balling out, right?
Chris, if I hit the Powerball, the last thing I'm worried about is what I'm going to do with the $2,000 in my savings account. I don't care. It don't matter. Do whatever you want with it. It's
right.
Good. I don't care anymore. If you get a franchise quarterback, wherever you get him, however you get him, if you draft him, if you trade him, if you get him on free agency, if you develop him, if you steal him, it doesn't matter. However you get him, nothing else matters anymore at that position. You just keep that guy, pay him whatever it takes to get. Trubisky's a young guy. It's not like he's 35 and going to be a franchise quarterback. If you get a franchise quarterback out of Mitch Trubisky, you just sign him, and then you ask Kenny what he wants to do, probably, because it doesn't matter to you anymore. Like,
right.
He wants to trade you, you want to stay and be a backup, whatever. It doesn't matter. I think he's a player you could get a lot for in a trade. I mean, I think you look at some of the guys that have been, there have been relatively few of those players where they get drafted in the first round, they sit behind a guy and they never get an opportunity to start, and then the team trades them before we ever really see what they're like. That's a pretty rare circumstance. I think he would be pretty highly sought after, but it's a good problem to have.
It's a great problem to have. And to your point, Trubisky will be 28 years old when the season begins. So that's great age for quarterbacking. By the time that his contract,
12 years on the Brady clock.
12 years on the Brady clock. If he is playing amazing at 28, that second year of that contract, the Steelers won't even let it get there. Like if he plays great this year, if he's a Pro Bowl quarterback. Yeah. He's getting an extension, like you said. And then they'll see what happens with Kenny Pickett. Because like you said, someone might get thirsty and say, hey, that quarterback's sitting on your bench. You might get a situation, Mitch Trubisky may have a great year, but may get hurt for a game, may not be able to play. And then Kenny Pickett has, the Matt Flynn effect where he comes in, balls out for one game, and then some team is like, hey, we'll do everything we can to get that guy. And then they'll bring him over, and you're just like, okay, well, if you're the Pittsburgh Steelers, you like Mitch Trubisky. You're not going to go away from the guy that's been winning you the games. I appreciate Michael's question because it is a possibility, and a possibility I don't think we've allowed ourselves to even broach yet because we don't know if either of these guys is going to be good. Mitch Trubisky could completely bomb this season. Kenny Pickett could be a complete bust. Mason Rudolph could be there. We don't know who's going to be good and who's going to be great or who's going to be bad. But we do know that all of these guys have potentials that the Steelers have liked what they've seen and are going to keep working with, and they're not going to just hand anything over to anybody.
Yeah, and I'll go back to I think one of the things that I feel like the reason this question is coming up is that people have this oh, well, if Trubisky turns out to be good, then you wasted that first round pick. And that's not how it works.
No.
Nobody knows that, you didn't sign Mitch Trubisky thinking he was a sure thing for $7 million a year.
Right.
It's the same thing. It's like, oh, I just hit the Powerball. What am I going to do with these scratch offs I bought? Well, it doesn't matter. I don't care. Like that Powerball ticket wasn't a sure thing, so I bought 4 of them, and guess what? One of them hit. That's how it works. I don't care anymore what happens to the losers. I already won the lottery, and
right.
And so yeah, if the Steelers used their biggest free agent signing and their number 1 draft pick on a quarterback and a 7th round draft pick on a quarterback, and one of them turns out to be a franchise quarterback, they're fine with that. Doesn't matter which one. If Chris Oladokun turns out to be a franchise quarterback and Kenny Pickett and Mitch Trubisky are both awful, the Steelers still won't care. That'll be awesome. That'll be
we
great.
got our guy.
Everybody's awesome. Awesome. Right out. It doesn't matter which one, where it comes from, and what happens to the rest of those guys. I mean, it matters for their career, but I don't think it matters to the team if they've got that dude.
Absolutely. And again, that's why I wanted to address this, because I think some people get stuck in, again, Kenny Pickett needing to be the guy because he's the first round pick. And if he doesn't work, oh, that's a terrible first round pick. It's like, look, you took a stab at a guy that you thought was a franchise dude, but then you already found your franchise dude. That's, again, great problem to have. Mike Tomlin and Omar Khan would take that every single year. Again, any team would take that every single year. Like, oh no, you drafted Patrick Mahomes, but it turned out you had Tom Brady on your roster the whole time. Whatever are you to do? Like, it's just come on, again, I get Michael's question, but I see some people out there that are trying to make this a blow up thing. Like, Kenny Pickett, he's not a starter already. You wasted the draft pick. He's not a starter. That's not how none of any of this works.
Yeah. And I think if he wasn't a first round draft pick, I don't think people would have that same thing. But there's this sort of mystique around the Steelers in the first round draft pick. People got mad when they traded it for Minkah Fitzpatrick. There's this sort of expectation that is just going to be some guy that's going to play here for years and years. And it's just a guy in a roster spot like anybody else. That's what they had to pay to get him. But at the end of the day, it's just about who can perform and giving yourself. It's short of having a guy that is going to be that dude, just giving yourself as many options as you can of guys that might be. That's what the Steelers offseason was all about. And if they get one of those guys to pan out, then the offseason, all of those parts are a success. And it doesn't matter which way it happens. Mason Rudolph turns out to be a starting quarterback and they didn't end up needing those guys. It doesn't mean that was a waste. It doesn't mean it was a bad idea, because seems like a pretty low percentage that turns out to be the case for Mason, right? You don't bet on those low percentages. You hedge them. You say, oh, well, I mean, this guy doesn't really look like the guy. Let's build around him. Let's see what else we can put there. And then if he still turns out to be the guy, that wasn't a waste. That was smart.
Was Emmanuel Sanders a bad pick at wide receiver because Antonio Brown?
Better? Right, no. I mean, it's different at quarterback because you generally play one. You can play 3 or 4 wide receivers, but it just doesn't matter, especially at quarterback. You're just – I think it's the most difficult thing to project from college quarterback to NFL quarterback in everything that we do. We can move guys from system to system. We can move guys from one team to another. We can move other players at other positions from college to the pro and have a pretty good idea what they're going to be like. Projecting quarterback performance is the hardest thing to do in football. If you get one, great. And whatever you have, however many lottery tickets you had to buy to get there, it doesn't matter, because it's really, really hard to win without one.
If you spent $1,000 to hit the Powerball that gave you about $500 million,
still won.
yeah, you still won the game.
All those 9,999 loser tickets are still winners because one of them hit.
Exactly. Alan, we're over our time, but this was a fun discussion. Thanks so much for coming on the Locked On Steelers podcast. And thanks so much for everything you do at SteelersNow.com, where you can find both of us who write. But Alan, let people can find you, follow, and get more of your work.
At @ASaunders_PGH on Twitter. I'm also on Instagram, but that's mostly just dog pictures. If that's your thing, get in there. Otherwise, SteelersNow.com, all the stuff Pittsburgh sports now for the college sports, and that's it.
Absolutely. Do check out Alan. He has a great football mind. We talk all the time. In fact, we were just talking on Monday about different things football for several hours, even before this show. So it's glad to have him. Alan, we'll have you back on very soon. Thanks again for you, the listeners and viewers, checking out this show. Remember, we're on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and YouTube. If you watch this video on YouTube, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button to get all of our daily episodes Monday through Friday, as well as our breaking news updates and our bonus episodes where we may answer more of your questions. If you want to help out the show even further, go on Apple Podcasts. Leave us a 5-star review with a positive comment. Do both at the same time. You get a special shout out at the end of the show. Again, I'm Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. You can also read my work at SteelersNow.com, where you also find Alan Saunders. We'll be back tomorrow with Wes Euler. He'll be back on the show giving you his thoughts right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.